Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. The agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front, and you may also follow along by connecting to the district's website, www.wcsoh.org. Click on the district link, then select Board of Education and the Board Docs agenda, and select tonight's meeting. Excuse me. There will be two opportunities to address the board this evening, the first being Agenda Item 6.01. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.01 through 11.01. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. And then the second opportunity is Agenda Item 12.01. There is a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room if you would like to speak during public comments. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. And with that, Ms. Hendricks, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Berg.
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker.
Here.
Mr. Velardo.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson. Here. Ms. Cotter.
Here. Okay, at this time, if you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first agenda item that we're going to cover is, of course, our district recognitions, and I would like to recognize Mr. Velardo, who's going to make those announcements and provide information on that.
Thank you, President Cotter. It's always an honor for all of us to recognize the really outstanding, great work that's being done throughout the district. I am going to go to the podium. I'll bring a couple of resolutions with me. If Dr. Kellogg and my fellow board members would stand up in front here so we can begin the recognition process. Okay, the first one has to do with our future city recognition of Heritage middle school students. Do we have any students from Heritage here tonight? I'm very excited. We're not going to call you up just yet. I'm going to call up Miss Ann Bates, if you would come forward, please. And then I have a recognition that I will read, and then I think, Ann, you have something to say, and you'll be bringing the students up.
Yes.
And students, when you come up, you will be recognized. You'll get to go up and say hello to Dr. Kellogg, and he's the one on the, he can. Dr. Tomlin in the house. Say hello to Dr. Tomlin, everybody. Dr. Tomlin, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, we got that. Thank you. Was I reading the resolution yet? Thank you very much. The resolution, oh, I know, you're going to go up and you're going to say hello to Dr. Kellogg, the rest of the board. When you say hello to Dr. Kellogg, he's the one that grants the snow days, so if you want to slip that in, you're welcome to do that. All right. Very excited to have you all here tonight. Resolution of commendation for Heritage Middle School. Whereas teams of students from all around the country spent 4 months preparing for the Future City competition, writing 1,500-word essays on the topic, An Age-Friendly City, completing a computer component using SimCity software, creating an engineering project plan, building a scale model of their city of the future using mostly recycled materials, and preparing a presentation to share at the state competition. And whereas on Saturday, January 20, 7th and 8th grade students from throughout Ohio competed in the state's Discover Ease Future City competition, held at the Eastland Career Center. And whereas the team from Heritage Middle School, led by teacher Ann Bates and engineer Eric McPeak from the Delaware County Regional Sewer District, took first place in the state competition and was chosen to represent Ohio in the national Future City competition in Washington, D.C., beginning February 20. And whereas for their city, Sophia Vitae, did I pronounce that right? Phew, that's a lot of pressure. Meaning age is wisdom. The Heritage team also took first place in the best use of recreation, best computer city design, and honorable mention for best land surveying practices. Therefore, be it resolved that the Westerville City Schools Board of Education and Superintendent congratulate Team Heritage for their success in the Future City competition and thank them for representing our school district and the state of Ohio with pride and distinction. We are very proud of all of you. Would you give them a hand?
Thank you, Mr. Velardo. Good evening, President Cotter, Vice President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Hendricks. It's my great pleasure to present the 2018 Future City team from Heritage Middle School. I can't tell you how honored I have been to be able to work with these students, the best and the brightest, at Heritage Middle School, and it's truly been one of my highlights of my career. Each Future City project starts with a question: how can I make the world a better place? Over the 4-month-long project, I saw all the things that we as educators provide in our curriculums and course of studies come to life. The students use their SSR and lunchtime, a few weekends, and a few days of winter break to imagine, research, design, and build a city of the future that showcased their solutions to this year's theme, the age-friendly city, and created their city, Sophia Vitae, meaning age is wisdom. The group worked as a team to use math, science, technology concepts and applied them to real-world issues. They researched, wrote, revised, and edited a 1,500-word essay and a 7-minute presentation that was not only packed with humor, but knowledgeable of how their city worked. They developed public speaking, time management, project management, team building skills, and they had the great fortune to learn many different types of engineer and design from our engineer mentor, Eric McPeak. They learned how communities work, and I have no doubt that they will continue to be contributing members in their own communities. Our state championship drew attention of several organizations in the area. Age Friendly Columbus, the Columbus Mayor's Office, and the Governor's Office not only met with our group and listened to their presentations, but they have asked them to be a part of future roundtable discussions. How can we make this world a better place? Give students like these an idea, throw in some recycled materials, and watch them soar. It's my great pleasure that I introduce to you the 2018 Heritage Middle School Future City State Champions and Natural Qualifying Team. Come on up. Okay, so we have almost everyone here. So in this order, we're going to have Will Pyle, Kimberly Welsh, good job, Mahad Yusuf, Margaret Milo, we have a couple that aren't here tonight, Max Scholl, Dominic Steele, but we have Matthew Solowinski, also not here tonight, Dylan Penny, but we have Lauren Arn, should I do this if they're not here? another student that couldn't be here tonight, Dahlia Mahmood, sorry. John Stowers. Jeffrey Siefker. Caitlin O'Brien. Kelsey Schmidt. And our engineer mentor, Eric McPeak.
Thank you, sir.
In closing, as the principal of Heritage Middle School, it is an honor and a privilege to support and serve the students and families, not only throughout our school, but specifically these students here. They couldn't have had this honor without their families. Want to make sure we recognize them as well. And I have another resolution in my hand as well. This was Senator Chris Jordan visited our school and has a senatorial resolution that was resolved here on March the 6th, 2018, a Senate Resolution number 425 to recognize and honoring Heritage Middle School Future City team as well. So again, well done. However you frame it, it is a wonderful success. So thank you so much for everything that you've done to represent the school and the district. Thank you.
Really wonderful stuff. Thank you, students, for being here. At this time, I'd like to recognize the Reflection State winners, and for that, I would like to have Jill French please come forward.
President Cotter, members of the Westerville Board of Education, Dr. Kellogg, Mrs. Hendricks, executive staff, and distinguished guests, good evening. My name is Jill French. This year, Valerie Cumming and I had the pleasure of co-chairing the 2017-2018 National Reflections Program, and what a year it was. This year, 12 schools from around the district participated in the program, including 2 middle schools, 9 elementary schools, and our first ever preschool entry from the Early Learning Center, thus emphasizing the fundamental role the arts play in our children's development. The recognition you are giving tonight demonstrates your continued support, and Westerville Parent Council would like to thank you for recognizing these talented artists. In its 49-year history, the National PTA Reflections Program has encouraged students across the nation to explore their talents and create works of arts based on a chosen theme. Each year, millions of students in pre-K through grade 12 are recognized for bringing this theme to life through dance choreography, film production, literature, music composition, photography, and visual arts. This year's theme was Within Reach. This past fall, winning entries from the 12 participating schools advanced to the district competition. We were permitted to send 57 of our district winners to state judging, and 14 of those entries were recognized at the state level with either Award of Excellence, Award of Achievement, Award of Merit, or Honorable Mention. Tonight, we're proud to honor these 14 artists who placed at the Ohio PTA State Reflections level. I would also like to mention that Westerville City Schools had at least one winner in every category, as well as winners in each division. We also have 2 first-place winners who received Award of Excellence. These students will advance to the national level to compete against entries from all over the country. We wish them all the best in the national judging. So without further ado, I'm going to call up Valerie to recognize these talented artists.
Thank you. All right, first up tonight we have Lucy Biddlestone. Not sure if she made it this evening. Okay, next we have Sailor Hoder. All right, so I'm going to back up. Lucy Bittlestone, dance choreography, primary from Mark Twain, and she received an award of outstanding achievement. Sailor Hoder, are you here, Sailor? Dance choreography, primary division from the Early Learning Center, honorable mention. Emma Combs, dance choreography, primary division from McKay. She received an honorable mention. Next, we have Alicia Keenan, dance choreography, intermediate division from Emerson. She received an award of merit. Thomas Dalton, film production, intermediate category from Mark Twain. He received an honorable mention. Anna McCracken, literature, primary division from Hanby, and she received an honorable mention. Kimberly Welch, literature. Middle division, heritage, received an honorable mention as well. Ella Robino, literature, middle division from Walnut Springs. She received an honorable mention. Emma Combs, music composition, primary division from McVeigh. She received an award of excellence. Matilda Huth, music composition, intermediate division from McKay. She received an award of outstanding achievement. And I hope she didn't get too comfortable. Emma Combs, photography, primary division McKay Award of Merit. Next is Elena McComb, Visual Arts, Primary Division from Robert Frost. She received an honorable mention. Lily Venemeyer, Photography, Middle Division, Heritage, Award of Excellence. And finally, we have Diana Utia, Visual Arts, Middle Division from Heritage, and Award of Merit. In closing, we would again like to say congratulations to all of the artists, and to the board, teachers, staff, and parents. Thank you for your continued support. We want to encourage all the students to participate in next year's Reflections program, where the theme will be Heroes Around Me. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Congratulations, students. That's awesome. There is one addendum to that, one addition. Jill just informed me that Emma Combs, raise your hand, and Lily Venemeyer, raise your hand, have both qualified to go on to the national competition. We are very proud of all of you, and thanks for coming here tonight and just letting us share some of that joy with you and the parents. Obviously, the tremendous amount of work that you all have invested here as well. The district is just your support team, so thank you for letting us work with these students. Another recognition we have this evening is a state champion swimmer. I'd like to invite forward Jason Matthews, his coach, Rich Morris, and Westerville North Athletic Director, Wes Ellifritz. Jason is in case you can't tell, Jason is the student who, and I'm going to read a resolution to you. Resolution of commendation for Jason Matthews, whereas Jason Matthews, a state champion from Pickerington, began his swimming career as a Westerville North High School senior during the 2017-2018 season, competing in numerous meets, highlighted by a state record swim in the 100 breast of 53.89 at the Ned Reeb Invitational held at the Ohio State University on December 16, 2017. And whereas Jason broke school records at North in the 200 free, the 200 individual medley, the 100 breast, and broke pool records at the Westerville Recreation Center in the 100 free and the 100 breast, where he also was part of the record-setting men's 200 medley. And whereas Matthew's stellar swimming career included winning 2 sectional titles, 2 district titles in the 200 individual medley and 100 breast, and whereas on the OHSAA state meet held in Canton, Ohio, on February 24, 2018, before 2,500 cheering fans who were fixated, that's what it says, who were fixated on his every stroke in an effort to repeat as state champion, Matthews did not disappoint, winning the 100 breast for the second year in a row and finishing 3rd in the 200 individual medley, setting another new school record. Therefore, be it resolved that the Westerville City Schools Board of Education and Superintendent congratulate Jason Matthews and his coaches, Rich Morris, Maura Parker, and Matthew Bay, for bringing honor and distinction to his school and our district, and wish him success in all his future endeavors. Jason Matthews.
Dr. Kellogg and members of the board, thank you for allowing us to recognize Jason's accomplishments tonight. Pickerington's loss was our gain. As you heard Mr. Velardo say, this was Jason's senior year and also his first year with us here at Westerville North. And not only can we recognize Jason, his sister Janessa, who's a sophomore, finished 3rd at the state in the 100 breaststroke. So it has just been a joy to get to know not only Jason and his sister, but his parents as well. And as
as enjoyable as it was to watch him swim this year, the character that this young man has that represented his school and his family and this district so well, I think we're going to miss that just as much as we're going to miss him breaking all those records. So Jason, just cannot say enough about who you are as a young man. We know you're going to do awesome as you continue on at Ohio State next year for their swim team. So congratulations, and we know your best days are ahead of you. So congratulations, buddy.
Board members, distinguished guests, it's an honor to be here to honor such a great athlete. But what is lost in all of this is he's a better human being than he is as an athlete. It was an honor to be around this young man for just 1 year, but what he brought to our program outside of the pool will reap benefits to our program for years to come. He was so great with other kids on our team, encouraging them, helping them. He brought the level of competition up from our swimmers up to him just by being there and giving them attention. And for that, I'm forever grateful to him as not only as a swimmer, but as a human and part of our family, even though he was here for just 1 year. So thank you very much.
This is a well-organized machine we have right here. What? And our final recognition, very important as well, WOSU honors an outstanding classroom teacher and gives an award. And for that, I would like to have Jen Fry come forward to present. Could you go do that again? No.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Dr. Kellogg, members of the board. I'm very excited to get to present to you one of our teachers tonight who has won an Outstanding Teacher of the Year award from WOSU Classroom. WOSU Public Media has created Excellence in Education Awards to recognize outstanding school districts, leadership, and teachers in our community who demonstrate excellence and innovation in education. I'd like to congratulate Heather Griffith, one of our very own teachers, fourth grade teacher at Faust Elementary, for winning this award this year. I'm not done bragging about her. Drew Farrell, one of our ed tech coaches on the north end of the district who works with teachers at Faust Elementary, nominated Heather for this award because she's a truly passionate educator who wants not only to ensure the success of her students, but also the success of all people, teachers and students, and she's very good at supporting fellow teachers. Heather's been using technology to blend and personalize instruction in her classroom, and also as a tool for intervention and differentiation so that all students are challenged and flourish. She's a highly reflective teacher. She uses feedback from her peers, students, and parents to create meaningful learning experiences for her students. She's always willing to share her struggles and her successes with other educators. Heather is going to be presented her award at the WOSU Innovation Mixer on April 25th. She's also going to be awarded $500 for her classroom and, very importantly, a digital badge. Heather is going to be celebrated across WOSU Public Media's on-air platforms. She's going to be featured on their website, and they're also going to be doing an interview with her, which will also be featured on their website. So I'd like to congratulate Heather for earning this award.
Jen? You could, yes, thank you. Okay. They know me too well. We know that these recognitions take time, and we know that you all have busy lives. But I'm not sure that the board or Dr. Kellogg would say there's anything more important than recognizing the outstanding work of our students, our faculty, our staff, and the support that the community gives to us. So just as an aggregate from all of us, we are honored that you came tonight, and we are grateful for the way you have represented your school, but you have also represented the district, and I would say represented your family and the community well. So everyone give everyone else one more round of applause. And at this time, all the honorees and celebratories can can go into the hall. There's going to be some pictures, unless you would like to stay for the rest of the board meeting.
You should tell them that they will be released at the conclusion of the meeting. Come on, let's try to get in touch with them.
Who's trying to-
Call a mutiny.
Oh, it's not my phone. Was someone trying to get a hold of you?
Okay, can we adjourn?
Actually,
Okay, moving on in the agenda. Item 4.01 is to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on Monday, March 12th, 2018. We don't actually vote to approve our minutes, but if there are any questions on the minutes, if you could please let me know. Okay. Moving on to item number 5.01 is our facilities update. Can I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
just a report.
Oh, okay.
I
Well,
removed
chance to
that.
report.
I removed that motion.
Retracted.
Retracted.
Retract the motion. I would instead like to recognize Mr. LaRose. Oh, you're coming up? Okay, sorry, Greg.
It is going to be Wednesday.
Mr. V. Brands.
Thank you, President Cotter, Vice President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Mrs. Hendricks. This evening, we are bringing to you our promised update on the facilities and community engagement initiative, which is what I spearheaded for quite a bit, although Dr. Kellogg did the heavy lifting, giving all of the presentations and staff chats. When we first learned about this thought exchange product that you've heard so much about, we were very optimistic because this program allowed us to take a process that we were doing manually and basically bring it into the 21st century and have it all done electronically. And these conversations about expanded community engagement and greater numbers of participation than you would have in the past. It all sounded really good. So we were very optimistic, and I think it's safe to say that we were not disappointed. So what did we learn from this community engagement tool called Thought Exchange and all of these other meetings that we held? A little bit about Thought Exchange. What I'll show you here is the summary slide that gives a breakdown of our participants. We had 1,691 participants. Now, some of the terminology I think we need to go over so you're familiar with what that means. Participants, if you're familiar with some technology terms, if you've ever heard the term click-through, what that is basically you invite someone, there's a link, and if they click through that link to see what's happening, that's really what that 1,691 participants represents. It's people who clicked through to see exactly what this was. So these are people that have a basic level of understanding that, hey, the district is having some conversations about its facilities needs. Of those 1,691 participants that clicked through to see what was going on, 744 of those individuals actually participated by sharing thoughts, and their participation resulted in a total of 2,390 ideas and thoughts being shared through the process. All of those ideas were then reviewed, and 1,043 participants actually went through that process to continue to click through, read these ideas that were shared, and then of those 1,043 that clicked through to read and see what people had to say, 664 participants actually took the time to rate those thoughts, yielding 51,017 stars issued across all of the ideas. The star rating system was essentially, to what extent do you agree with what this statement is conveying? You could give 1 star, you could give up to 5 stars, and so everyone had the opportunity to participate and do that through that process. So when you look at the breakdown of who these participants were, and we get into our demographic figures, the bottom of the slide there, we had 68% of the participants identified themselves as a parent or guardian, 20% identified themselves as a staff member, 7% community members, 3% students, and 2% others. So what might an other be? That may be someone who's a business owner in the community, doesn't necessarily live in the community, but they're impacted by the quality of the school district as well. So that may be someone that participated in the process, because we did have some great partnerships with many of the community organizations spreading this email around and asking others to participate. I would like to make one call out when we look at the 7% community members. We talked with Thought Exchange about that, and they had said that that rate is actually a little bit higher than what they typically see in some communities, so that was a good thing. That number ends up being around 124 individuals when, if you look back at the total engagement process that we had with our strategic planning initiative, we had more community members participate in this than we had total number of participants in that strategic planning initiative a couple of years ago. So Thought Exchange was saying that, yeah, you're doing a little bit better than average than what they typically see from community member participation. And then on the right-hand side, you can see all of the breakdown as far as the school that the participants identified with. So those who identified themselves with any one of our elementary schools, that association ranged from 1% to 7% identifying themselves as an elementary parent, with Emerson being the highest at 7%. Middle school association ranged from 4% to 6%, with Walnut Springs being the high end at 6%. And then high school association ranged from 9% to 17% per building, with Westerville South at the high end at 17%. So all of these individuals that participated, they were essentially asked to share their thoughts on the 3 priority levels of projects. Question 1, these were the facility committee recommendations that rose to the critical level category. So that was work on Westerville South High School, new middle school, and district-wide safety and security initiatives. So these are representative of some of the comments that you saw coming up, the nature of the comments that you saw most often. Some examples would be renovations to Westerville South High School are needed for the safety and to enhance learning environments for students. It's our responsibility to provide safe and conducive learning environments for our students. As with our homes, our schools require updates. What we saw throughout this question was there was general agreement with the projects and the types of initiatives that were listed. We had some comments reflecting the belief that we should have 21st century teaching and learning environments for current and future Westerville students, and that well-designed schools give our community a shared sense of pride and enable its growth. And it also comments about middle school, that sufficient middle school staff and facilities are key. This is the age when it's most awkward for students, and they're trying to figure out who they are and where they belong, as well as trying to figure out all of the changes that are occurring emotionally and physically, and that the schools provide that stable, safe place for them to grow. So those were just some examples of the types of sentiments that were shared with question 1. Question 2, this was reflective of the Facilities Committee's work that was categorized as important. This was renovations and expansion of Longfellow Whittier Elementary Schools, renovations to Hawthorne, sale of Hanby and Emerson, demolition of Central College Elementary but retaining the land, and then the construction of a new elementary school in the southern end of the district. Again, there was general agreement with many of those items, but there was concern expressed for preserving the heritage of Uptown and the use of our school facilities that are located uptown. So some of those sample comments were, I truly do not agree with selling Emerson and Hanby. It's not only a district staple, but a staple for the community. It's part of the Westerville Schools heritage. The age of the Emerson building is not a con to student education. The history of the building adds value to the learning environment. It feels safe and homey, not old and decrepit. Some other comments included recognition that Whittier is actually a good size in terms of the population. Renovations would be a better option than expanding. And also agreement for renovations to Hawthorne. That Hawthorne has the necessary space to successfully renovate, and the south side of the district needs some attention. The third question that was posed was really the summary of those projects that were identified as when funds allow, which included renovation and expansion of Amherst Elementary School, expansion of the magnet program, expansion of all-day kindergarten, and district-wide furniture replacement. Again, there was general agreement with all of these concepts that were in the when funds allowed. One call out there would be that Amherst actually gained some support to being a higher priority item than when funds allow. So some of those sample comments coming out of this would be Amherst classrooms must be contained and have walls to the ceiling. This is the first thing parents mention. This should be a critical level 1 or 2 issue with expansion level 3 issue. We definitely support new furniture in all the schools that need it. Furniture is piecemeal together in many cases. Having furniture that allows kids to work in appropriate spaces would be great. General comment about renovations need to be made to keep our schools and students safe, and an all-day kindergarten being expanded would be a wonderful idea. 2.5 hours is nothing, seems like busy work, not enough time to actually learn much. One of the other options that this gives us is to go across the 3 questions, and what Thought Exchange did is in all of the comments that were received, they went through to look for themes, and so those themes are listed down the left-hand side there. Expansion of all-day kindergarten, historical value and heritage of the community, Westerville South High School, Amherst. So I won't read all of those, but I will call out. You'll see some that have a blue arrow next to them. Those are the themes that showed up across all 3 questions, not necessarily prompted as far as which themes would come out, but these are the ones that ended up showing up across all 3 questions. And those themes are concern about aging facilities, the desire for 21st century learning environments, addressing capacity and size issues, ensuring that resources are provided equitably, and then project planning. Comments such as don't underestimate our needs, we have to strive for sustainability and efficiency, and the timing of the projects, many of those types of comments that all relate to project planning. And these are actually very reflective of, I referenced the strategic planning process earlier. These are actually very reflective of many of the comments that we heard also throughout the strategic plan, and ties all of that back together. So a few other observations before I turn it over to Mr. LaRose. There was very strong support for Westerville South High School projects from all of the participants that identified themselves as being from the other two high schools. We had an average of 4.5 stars rated for Westerville South projects from people who identified themselves from Westerville North and 3.9 from Westerville Central. Westerville South was 4.4 star average. The support for all-day kindergarten was highest among parents. That garnered an average of about 4.1 stars, followed by staff at 3.5 stars, students who participated at 3.5 stars, and community members at 3 stars. The concern about the future of the district's historic buildings was highest among community members at 4.8 stars, staff members 3.9 stars, and parents gave it 3.8 stars. Students averaged 3.3 stars. Support for safety and security members was highest among parents and staff at 4.3 stars each, followed by community members at 4 stars, and then students at 3.4 stars. And then there was slightly more support for a new middle school than a new elementary school, though both were actually identified as favorable projects. 3.825 stars, we had to go down to the 1,000% for this one, 3.825 stars across the demographic categories for a new middle school versus 3.62 stars for elementary. So the next step with this is clearly we will use this project again for the second phase of community engagement that we spoke of, but we are very close to having the public-facing side of this complete. There will be a website that provides all of these statistics and the ability for community members to go in there, see the comments, drill down through, and do some of their own data analysis. I'm hoping that that should be launched within the next week or two. We're actually very close with that. And I just saw an email just before the board meeting pop in tonight that we may have a draft to be able to review soon. So we are very close with that aspect. So with that, I will invite Mr. LaRose up.
Greg, before we transition, do you want to see any board members' questions on this particular aspect?
That's what I was just going to ask. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
Could you, real quickly, review the stars for safety and security again? No, not the comments that you did. The star rankings that you did, the last piece that you did for all different categories?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Safety and security.
Find it in my notes here.
Did do that, didn't he?
We have the first question included safety and security initiatives. Safety and security, yes, there it is. It was highest among parents and staff at 4.3 stars each, followed by community members at 4 stars and students at 3.4 stars.
Thanks. I think it's interesting that our students have a higher degree of feeling safe than community and parents do. I'm not making any, I just think that's interesting. Thank you. That's why I wanted to hear that.
I am pleased that we had over 100 community members participate. However, I'm not pleased because we only had over 100 participate. It's interesting to me that that is higher than is the norm that Thought Exchange sees. I think that if we continue to use Thought Exchange in the future, we should see that increase. As I've talked to a lot of people in the community, there's still a lot of, I didn't know about this, I didn't understand what this was. I thought facilities was just for parents and teachers and kids to respond to. So I think as we move through this process more, we will be able to generate more involvement of our community members, and I'm very pleased about that.
I would agree. And Dr. Nestor Baker, I know that you know the stages of moving through communication to action. You know, there's that general awareness, and you continue to move through the phases to the point where people then actually begin to participate. And so with this being the first launch of a product like this, and the advertising that we did and the direct outreach through email, and many people rightfully so being skeptical of getting emails that say, click this link. You know, so I think as the awareness continues to grow, I think that we will see those numbers also grow.
But even so, it is worth reiterating that we had far more involvement through thought exchange than we had through the strategic plan process.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very
And that
important.
was just of the community members. I mean, when
Yes.
you look through the results and you see almost 1,700 people that bothered to click through and see what was going on, I would venture to guess that's higher than many levels of participation than we've seen for initiatives such as this.
Yes. Thank you, Greg.
Well, I think that's part of the challenge, right, is what's the baseline for comparison, right? Because if we have nearly 1,700 click-throughs, when we look at online surveying, the standard accepted norm for good results is 10 to 15%. So the challenge is 10 to 15% of what? If we take 10 to 15% of 165,000 people within the school district, then we're not even close. However, if we take 10 to 15% of total student population, we seem to have a very good response, right? So it's tricky. What I find really interesting is that I feel a little bit the opposite. I feel like we did a lot of work to distribute knowledge about the existence of the online survey capability. And what I find more interesting, as opposed to just the general response rate, is two aspects. The first is that Thought Exchange would indicate to us that at 7%, basically non-affiliated, I'm a community member, I don't have a child in school, I'm not designating myself as a staff member, is higher than the norm. It suggests something that I had mentioned a number of months ago, which is people participate in issues that they feel personally vested in. So I think that there's a concern that I have about how is it that we continue to move the needle in making all community members feel vested in the educational landscape in Westerville, as opposed to people weighing in on opinions at a point in time when they feel most concerned about them. And I think that is compounded by the other pieces of the results that I see, which is when you look at the distribution of stars and/or responses across schools, I would think, and I've done some digging in the tool this afternoon, I would think that what we saw was a lot of input from people about their school and their children in that school, which is entirely understandable. However, it makes it difficult for us to get an accurate picture of the community's position on the entire school district. And we're going to need to sort through that, because as we go through the remainder of the presentation, there are economic consequences and decisions that go with things like my strong historical attachment to Emerson and Hamby. Cool. I don't disagree. I love those buildings, but to get them to 21st century educational and safety standards is a money conversation. And that'll definitely be parts of the next pieces that we've got to plow through. Because when we say that we want these things as a community, there is no escaping the reality that there's a price tag associated with that want, right? So but I think it was a very thorough surveying approach. And like we said, we got returns that we've not seen before relative to community input.
And Mr. Byrd, I would add, too, to your comment about individuals having that school-centric vision for what they are interested in. I would say that that's probably true when it comes to them providing their personal comments, but the Thought Exchange program, the way it works when they are given the opportunity to review comments, those are comments across the board about anything and everything. So the comments that would come up as they participate in that discovery process and the rating process wouldn't necessarily be strictly isolated to their school. And I think that's why we saw that high level of support from the other high schools for Westerville South. I think people recognize that that's a facility that needs some attention. So, but that's a very accurate call out, I believe. That's my cue.
Thanks very much.
My exit.
Great presentation, Greg. Mr. LaRose?
Thank you, Greg, members of the board. So with the information from Thought Exchange as well as the staff chats and the community meetings, we took this feedback and we've made some modifications to the recommendations that the Facilities Committee presented to the board in December. So I am going to review those with you. So in reference to the Priority 1 recommendations, the feedback supports the construction of a new middle school in the southern part of the district and continuing to address school safety concerns. The feedback also supports building improvements at South High School, but there were questions raised as to whether South should be renovated or replaced. And after careful consideration of both options, we are recommending renovations to South that include expanding the building to provide spaces for project-based learning opportunities. Building new certainly offers fewer design limitations, but when we considered the possibilities within the existing structure and the cost savings, a renovation expansion received stronger support. For example, a renovation expansion is estimated to be $20 million less than a building replacement. And with new, there is a high probability that the usable site acreage would decrease based on limitations as to how the land on the current building footprint could be used. And from the feedback we received, there's one issue that provides some concern with renovations, and that's the size of the hallways, and it was concerned with traffic flow. But we feel confident with some design ideas that we can overcome that obstacle. So we are making the recommendation to renovate and expand. For Priority 2, the committee recommendations have been modified to include a building addition at Longfellow to house the Hanby Magnet program. The committee did recommend the expansion, but they did not specify how the addition would be used. So we are specifying the use for Hanby. The feedback supports renovations to Whittier, but without a building expansion. Modifications are being recommended to retain and renovate Emerson School in lieu of selling or repurposing Emerson. So that's a big change from the original committee recommendation. Modifications also include moving the renovation of Amherst from a Priority 3 when funds allow to a Priority 2 important. And this includes enclosing the classrooms similar to the renovation work completed at Point View in 2016. Renovations to Hawthorne, a new elementary school in the southern part of the district, and the demolition of Central College and holding the land are all supported as recommended. There was some concerns raised over the selling repurposing of Hanby, but not enough to support to modify those recommendations. The small classroom sizes at Hanby appear to carry enough weight to support the committee's recommendation to sell or repurpose, and this is in contrast to the size of the classrooms at Emerson. You roughly have 900 plus square feet at Emerson, and where those classrooms at Hanby about 600 square feet. And for Priority 3, the feedback supports the expansion of all-day kindergarten, supports the expansion of our magnet program, and supports furniture upgrades district-wide, again, when funds allow. And as I said earlier, Amherst has been reassigned from a Priority 3 to a Priority 2. So last April, the board approved entering into an active planning process with the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, the OFCC. And this process includes having a team of architects and engineers assess the current conditions of each school, updating the 10-year student enrollment forecast, and then using this information to develop a long-range facility master plan for each school building. The board also recommended having an independent architect assess the condition of our school buildings in tandem with the OFCC. And Triad Architects was used to provide an assessment independent of the OFCC. The following slides provide a brief summary of the condition assessments completed by both teams The assessments include our 14 elementary schools, 4 middle and 3 high schools, as well as Central College, Longfellow, and the Academic Enrichment Center. The OFCC's assessment includes a suitability appraisal that provides an overall rating based on the size and effective use of the school site, the condition of the building structure and components, the ease of maintaining the building materials used for construction, building safety and security, the adequacy of room sizes, and the comfort and aesthetics of the environment. And the ratings range from excellent to satisfactory, borderline poor to very inadequate. And that's based on there are 97 questions that they review, and there's points associated with that to come up with a percentage that determines which category that would fall into. So this slide shows the summary rating for each school. So Faust was the highest rated at excellent. 18 schools were rated as satisfactory. Amherst, Charrington, Hanby, and Whittier rated borderline, and Central College rated as poor. This just goes into a little more detail with the 5 schools that rated below satisfactory. Central College and Hanby were rated as borderline for the school site. Amherst, Charrington, Hanby, and Whittier rated borderline for structural mechanical. Central College rated poor. Amherst, Hanby, and Whittier rated borderline for plant maintainability. Central College was rated as very inadequate. Central College and Hanby were rated poor for safety and security. Whittier rated borderline for educational adequacy. The other 4 schools rated poor and under environment for education. Amherst, Central College, and Hanby were rated borderline. And noted at the bottom of this slide, Emerson, Hawthorne, Longfellow, Blendon, Heritage North, and South were just right at the cutoff between borderline and satisfactory, but those schools were rated satisfactory. So this is a list of the building components that were evaluated as modeled by the OFCC. The 5 that are highlighted represent the top 5 building component needs in terms of cost that both assessment teams have in common. And ironically enough, these 5 components represent 67.1% of the total cost with each assessment team. And I should note that the assessment team not only is looking at current needs, but they are forecasting needs out over a 10-year period. So the total assessment, the cost includes work in a 10-year period. This is a list of the top 6 building components for each assessment team. Electrical systems, not in common, rounds out the top 6 for the OFCC. And furniture completes the top 6 list for Triad. The top 6 make up 79% of OFCC's total cost and 77% of Triad's total cost. And it just footnoted off to the right, and it's not bolded, but under electrical systems where you see 2.6, that's just showing what Triad, it did make the top 6, but Triad had 2.6% of their cost in electrical systems. There are similarities in the cost percentages, but in terms of total cost, Triad's assessment is 43% under the OFCC, and we believe that there are 3 main reasons for that. One, Triad has a much more detailed working knowledge of our buildings due to their 17 years of experience working with Westerville City Schools. The OSFC's assessment is based on approximately a half a day or less walkthrough in each building. 2, the OFCC uses a more generalized method for estimating, relying on an average cost per square foot and applying this unit cost to the building's total square footage. And Triad was able to modify this method of estimating by crediting back recent equipment replacements that have been completed as part of our capital improvement program. And three, Triad actually expanded the industry standard life cycle for some of the equipment replacements based on life cycles that are currently working for Westerville schools. And this is a result of the current performance of our preventive maintenance program. So as an example, OFCC, they look at the age of an air handler, they replace the air handler. And as you know, many times what we do is we look at component replacement within the air handler versus a total replacement. So those are things that were factored in Triad's cost analysis based on their working knowledge of the district.
And so the second point, Triad would have a little more accurate sense of what we have done recently, and OFCC might not have factored some of that in.
And actually, OFCC recognizes that, and this is a quote, project costs remain to be reviewed by the district and subject to change based on input from the district and the district's pre-bond architect. So as I've looked through, and there's about 5 inches of thick document that you were reviewing, but as an example, they had in there the replacement of the windows at Emerson, and that's certainly something we've done within the past 10 years. We don't foresee that need for replacement in the next 10 years, and that wouldn't have been in Triad's report. So after entering into the active planning process with the OFCC, they had originally projected partial funding availability for Westerville in 2019. And last month, we were notified that funding is currently tracking about 2 years further out, so looking at availability in 2021. So this slide shows a breakdown of the planning and construction activities for an OFCC coordinated project based on the durations listed in their 2017 school design manual. And there is a minimum and maximum duration established in the manual for each activity, which is shown on the slide. Based on a funding approval date of November 2021, the time frame for occupying a renovated or new building ranges anywhere from January of 2025 to November of 26. So that puts us about 7 to 9 years out to complete a co-funded project with the OFCC. You remember those discussions originally. Yeah. I see you smiling.
I do remember that discussion.
So we recently discussed with the OFCC that we were interested in starting the construction of our master plan prior to their anticipated shared funding availability. And they shared that we could divide our plan into segments so as not to delay an early start and still be eligible to obtain state matching funds for the segmented work. And the segmented work would require approval from both the commission and their controlling board. Any work completed prior to the state funding approval would not be eligible for state matching funds. But the good news is we could segment.
Does that segmenting have to be bound to their qualifying statements in this suitability and other categories, or?
There's an opportunity to have discussions about that.
Okay.
That's certainly the starting point. They're less rigid than they were, what was that, 16, 17 years ago when we had original discussions.
And you see me making faces, and you know what's going through
Sure.
my head.
Yeah, yeah.
You know that. But that's one of the questions that I had as well, Richard. When we're talking about segmenting, and I want to understand this, so that I get where we're going. When we talk about segmenting, does that mean that we can choose which components of the projects need to be done and submit only those segments to the OFCC, or do we have to, as was done in the past, it has to be the whole thing, the whole facility plan, basically? In other words, when we do segmenting, are we just basically parceling it out over time, or are we parceling it out based on which segment we wish to present to OFCC?
We're parceling it out, but you're not necessarily looking at the whole thing in aggregate as we once did. So, for example, I think Dr. Kellogg mentioned the possibility of segmenting just the new builds. So a new middle school and a new elementary school. So they looked at each other and said, yeah, maybe that's a possibility. But again, it has to go through their controlling board for final decision. And typically, the controlling board is not going to accept it unless the commission accepts it. So I guess I would say there would be a strong influence in meeting their requirements for the grouping of buildings that we've identified. Is that making sense? Or?
It does, but I'm curious about a hypothetical, which
Sure.
would be, so if we know we have a second wave of capital improvements looking at us in a decade, and we know that the state's machinery operates on a 9-year cycle, based upon what we just saw on the timeline, is it worthwhile to segment out those projects that we know would be in that next wave post 10 years and line them up for evaluation for co-projects a decade ahead of time?
Certainly an option.
Okay. It sounds crazy when I say it.
No.
It sounds crazy when I hear it.
That we're talking about, about using the system for 10 years out, but, yeah.
Do you know of any segmented plans that have been approved by the commission?
I do. Southwestern City Schools. So there's segmented projects where the elementaries that they just completed, and their next segment will target their middle school. So a segmented, for our situation, might look something like this. If we were to target, as I recall, Jeff, we talked about middle school, for example, hypothetical. If you targeted middle school and said addition of a new middle school as a co-funded OFCC project, the segmented component would be not just the new middle school, but any OFCC recommendations as it relates to all of the middle schools, right? So you tie that together and you say, where are our middle schools to Mr. Bird's thinking, right? If you attach that segmented concept to middle schools, for example, tie the new middle school and other middle school improvement projects down the line together, that's a segmented project. Same thing with elementary. The tricky piece is things that we do prior to a segmented project have an impact on how the OFCC's final master plan components are going to look like. So decisions we make at this time regarding schools will then weigh into later when they actually finish out and look at building capacity, et cetera. And I don't think as we're looking at the recommendations, we're not sensing that there's anything in what we're looking at today that would necessarily make it difficult to do a segmented project later, if that makes sense.
It would be to go along with what you're saying, Jerry, I would be very interested in knowing what is the likelihood of success in approval on the segmenting. It's kind of like I've often wondered, what's the likelihood of approval on waivers with the 2/3 rule? All of those components, we kind of need to know what's our likelihood of success on what sort of segmented projects tend to be approved more readily. So, we know anecdotally that Southwestern was successful, but where does that lie within the rest of the school districts in Ohio? So that would be very interesting information to help me as we make decisions and as we queue up what needs to happen in the second decade, so to speak.
Well, and absolutely. I think that's a great option to look at, and maybe you could find out some other districts that have done some segmenting and the success or not and so on. But, the unstated thing here is, how is OFCC funded? State. And the state is always consistent with their funding, right? They don't change anything. So, okay, take my tongue out of my cheek. So as we look at long-term stuff, there's always the issue of the changing winds of the state
in
funding.
office.
Of who's in, so that doesn't mean we don't look long-term. I think we do. I actually like the idea of looking at those kind of pieces. But I don't want people to think, well, okay, well, that's a guarantee down the road.
Well, and I think that that's a piece that we need to add to this discussion.
Yeah.
With our community members many community members that have come to us and talked about OFCC money.
Yeah.
I think we have to keep a couple of different things in perspective. The first is the volatility of our State House and Governor's office when it comes to funding for education.
That's a good word.
Yeah. And the unpredictability of it, right? But even beyond that, I think just talking through this, I mean, for the folks that are here having to listen through this, I'm sorry, but we're talking about the really difficult, complicated execution of construction projects in a school district our size already being challenging. All the logistics that we have to figure out, all the continuous maintenance that we have to figure out, and including the OFCC doesn't make that less complicated. All right, I think hopefully if you walk out of here, you've got in your mind that adding OFCC into anything makes things exponentially more complicated, right? And the question is that are those complications based upon probabilities that can have either success or failure in going this route? Are those complications worth the headache of going into business with the state relative to the improvement or building of school buildings?
Is
Right?
the return on the investment
Yeah.
worth it?
Right.
And that's kind of the long term.
Right.
Anyway, I love that idea of segment and looking down. And if we can get more information on that, that would be great.
But Jeff, did I hear you say, so if we would take money from them to build a new middle school, we would have to address what they would consider issues at our other middle schools at the same time? Did I understand?
So to
I'd
look.
say there's a
go
high
ahead.
probability of that.
Right.
But I didn't hear anything definitive. Dr. Kellogg, I'm not sure if you read that differently. It almost sounded like there's a negotiations that goes along with that. But the bottom line is they were saying, but it has to be supported by the controlling board.
Got it.
I have non-segmentation questions
Sure.
for you, for some clarification, if you would. Going back to the suitability appraisals, educational adequacy. As you talked about that, basically you were talking about room size. Is room size the sole identifier for educational adequacy?
No. It's heavily weighted in that direction. But for educational adequacy, there's 23 questions. Now, it does look like a lot of these are size-related, whether that's academic learning spaces or storage spaces.
But a lot of it
teacher
is square
workrooms,
footage based.
A lot of it is associated with the size of the space.
Okay. That helps me understand what they're actually talking about. Also, Faust and Alcott are sister schools. They're identical buildings.
Yes, they
They're
are.
built at the same time, open the same time, are maintained successfully in the same way, and yet they have different appraisal ratings. Any ideas why?
Let's see here. Faust was a 91%. I think the cutoff for excellent was 90 and above. And Alcott was 87. So when I look at, educational adequacy for room sizes at Alcott, and again, keep in mind, this could be how they're using the rooms. So 80% at Alcott and 98% at Faust.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Also, Charrington and Whittier did not rate well. And their ratings, as you broke those down, were similar in a number of categories. Now, obviously, we haven't been talking about Charrington because Charrington falls into that next group. However, according to the OFCC, there are substantial issues worth addressing at Charrington. However, we've got Charrington and Whittier that rate the same borderline as Hanby, and yet we're talking about taking Hanby offline. Where's the difference? If we have borderline for Hanby, borderline for Whittier, and borderline in the overall
Yeah, but look at the
rating.
details of the rating, Charrington and Hanby. Hanby is borderline everything except for poor educational.
And that's class size.
Charrington is satisfactory. So if you look at plant, I don't need to answer your question.
No, it's fine. I think when you look at the committee's recommendation, isolated from the OFCC, the committee's recommendation was based on age of the infrastructure, the limited site. So you have a 1 acre site that the ability to expand the size of those classrooms at 600 square feet and less became very challenging. It appeared that, from the committee's perspective, you should look at new or adding somewhere else.
And I totally
That-
understand that.
Now, we don't, unfortunately, we don't have the OFCC's master plan to review against.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's just, isn't it weird? I mean, you have the most background with this, right? But if we think about, I know it's 17 years, right? I understand the difference. But isn't it weird that if we would have acted on the OFCC's recommendation based upon their methodology 17 years ago, we would have made mistakes and removed and/or changed or replaced buildings that are currently listed under their new program as
Yeah.
suitable,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Volatility.
yeah, I mean, how
The great
how do you
job that
change your
capital
methodology
plan's
so
doing.
much, right? What's that?
what a great job that capital plan's done for the past 17 years.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's so odd to me that we were given directions relative to a survey method that they did 17 years ago that now have buildings that are deemed adequate under their new scoring process. That's just crazy.
Yeah. I have one other question about the OFCC stuff.
Sure.
I'm not going to talk about the recommendations overall, the changes at this point in time. I'll wait another couple minutes.
Okay.
The two-thirds rule that you know has always been a bone of contention for me. Is the two-thirds rule, which basically, you know, and I'll let you tell everybody what it is because I will muddle it, but is the OFCC still basically tightly tied to the two-thirds rule as regards renovation versus replacement?
What's interesting, when I brought that up, the two-thirds rule, and the two-thirds rule being if the renovation cost is 66% greater than a replacement, then the recommendation would be to replace the building as per the recommendations in 2001. So they corrected me in the meeting and said it's a policy. I'm not sure I understand the difference, but
It sounds better.
but again, they're not, they still, I'm going to use the word recommendation. They still, it's recommended, but it's not an absolute like it was back in 2001.
Do you have to get a waiver?
For the two-thirds policy, no. Not as I understand it.
Should we talk about that one for a second, Mr. LaRose, in the conversation we had with OFCC and regarding the changes in their recommendations? Would you like me to address that one? It's
Either
the-
way,
The hot potato one. So Mr. Bird's correct in that in the 2001 recommendations that come from OFCC, and I would be careful, and Dr. Nestor Baker, I understand where you're coming from, but when we isolate the two-thirds rule as being simply about that particular building, I think you have to broaden how they're using that. So I'm going to give a little fairness to OFCC, but I'm going to tell you that the change that we noted was that the number of buildings that they would say fall under the two-thirds rule has changed. And so I asked the question. So in 2001, the data was X number of buildings
Right.
would
All these
meet that
buildings, yeah.
criteria and maybe considered for closure. And at this time period, wasn't the same. In fact, it improved, to your point. So I asked the question and got a good answer, and I used my simpleton ability to say, this is what I think you heard, which is basically this. As they track, I'm not telling you the truth, I'm just telling you what they told me. As they track construction costs over all the projects that they manage across the state, what they've seen over the last 15 years is that the average cost per square foot for renovation has actually accelerated faster than the rate of new construction. So the differential between those numbers and the rate of increase, which becomes the differential, right, becomes the metric, is such that the rate of new construction cost per square foot goes like this. The rate of renovation construction work does this, which creates a differential in the same building 15 years later. And part of the two-thirds rule isn't just that metric, but it's also then total capacity, because they have a limitation, they have a total capacity of the building, they have a total enrollment of 350 for an elementary at the smallest end. So you put that whole package together as they decide what the total capacity of the district is to meet enrollment futures. So you're correct, numbers change, And I don't want, I'm not defending OFCC, I just think we have to give a fair shake to the data set and understand fully what does that mean. What we don't have right now is a full facilities master plan from them, because they're hesitant to do that until they're close to project time frame, so they have actual enrollment numbers. Because the big picture for them is, how many kids you got today? How many are you gonna have in 2 years? What does that mean for total building capacity? What do you have today? If you have a building that has fewer than 350 kids, or has 350 kids but is smaller than the square footage that we recommend, how close are you? At Hanby, we're very close. At Emerson, we're not even close. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the community? So there's a lot of moving parts in there as it relates to the 2/3, changing those. But we did dive into that. I don't want anybody to think that we sat on our hands and didn't dive into that, because it was a glaring difference that we caught pretty soon and understand that. So as it stands now, from the data we got from OFCC, some of the buildings which would have been slated for closure in 2001 no longer fit the metric. And that may be a good thing, or that may be a bad thing, depending on how people look at it. That's kind of where we sit. But I don't think that data, but as I look at what OFCC said, cost differences, when you really look at what the board asked us for, which was 2 sets of data, in terms of components, the breadth of the work, and the focus buildings, the 2 sets of reports are pretty similar. Charrington becomes an outlier in one set of data, which is this piece, which is kind of borderline anyway. These are numbers that I wouldn't get too stuck on who's poor, who's not poor. I wouldn't get too stuck in there until you get deeper into it. A case could probably be made on all the data that Charrington, of all the schools that weren't in the recommendations, and remember the committee went with 55 years older, which happens to be 1/3 of the building, 7. You could make the case, and we didn't do it, the board could ask us to do it, to start including Charrington in this fleet of buildings rather than leaving it in the tail end. And that could be a case to be made. We didn't bring that one forward because we didn't think there was enough strength of evidence to say it's an immediate need in the next 5 or 6 years, but it certainly is a need, as our North, Heritage, Blendon are all in that second wave that we've talked about from age. So, I probably said more than I wanted to say, but is that your recollection, Jeff, as to what we heard with that was kind of the, oh, that's different?
That is very different. It's also very interesting, though, that as we look at the moving pieces and parts, we can't get really the information that we would need if we have to include, like the whole fleet of middle schools to make the decision and so forth. We can't actually get all of that information until we get much closer to their time frame, which brings us back to return on investment and lots to wrestle with.
They did agree, in fact, forgotten her name, who was in the room with us, that they took our Cropper enrollment projections. And, they've been very receptive to working with us outside of the scope of some of the things we're telling you about. So I say they won't give us a final master plan until closer to money availability and then their enrollment projections. But they did agree at this time to take the enrollment projections we have and draft out conceptually. It's not a, this is what it is, but it is a, what do we think we're looking at? So that if we do want to look at some of these timelines that I'm going to bring forward in a minute and talk about, okay, down the line, the possibility of an OFCC segmented project to meet these needs is a possibility for us to consider at that time. The question is, between now and that time, which is no sooner than 21, what do we do? And I think that's kind of where we're looking at. And then when that opportunity comes, as we get more data, more information from them, what would a segmented project possibility be if we wanted to do that? Because here, bottom line is, we're not getting all the money from them. We're getting somewhere between 25 and 30%. So if you do the math, if it's a $25 million building, you're talking $6 million of some sort difference for, as Mr. Byrd described, and we all know, the challenge of adding a third party, ourselves, construction people, and OFCC to the whole picture. And is that additional money, which is a savings to our taxpayers, worth it if it elevates the cost of the project or makes it more aggravation or gives us a project that's not satisfying to our community? And I think that's where we all know we land on this question.
Yeah.
Or doesn't meet, probably most importantly, doesn't meet the timing expectations of the local community, right? I think the reality is that there can be no doubt that the state will never be able to move at the speed that the local district community expects. Not when we start talking decades to get projects done, right? It's just not a time frame that most of our community members are interested in.
So this is all good info, and I really appreciate the explanations and the elucidations, if you will. I appreciate that a lot. But what I'm wondering then is, before we move into the next section of the presentation, I'm curious as to where we're going as regards the suggestions that are made around the changing of the recommendations of the committee, of our response to the recommendations of the committee. So for me, I need to go through those recommendations and decide where those are and are not as regards the board thinking as we move toward finance discussions. I'm going to need a better sense of what we're actually talking about doing and when we're talking about doing it.
And I think that's what this next, my
I'm just
show.
teeing it up. So
Thank you.
So you know. I'm not going to just kind of sit back and wait because I have a lot of questions related to the recommendations.
So before I begin, and I don't want to prolong what's already going to be a long presentation, but I guess I am. I want to thank a bunch of people. First of all, to the community members who did participate in the exchange and came to meetings and provide us input. I'm hoping that as we continue down this path, that they see that their opportunity for that voice was meaningful, that we're trying to respond to it. Doesn't mean that that's where we're at yet, but we are massaging things and moving things in a way to try and represent that that's important to us. The other thing to remember is that we're dealing with more than just that data set as we look at the OFCC data set, the information from Triad, feedback we get, as well as the bigger picture of how this is all fit together. And then to our staff, the team I work with, who have spent considerable number of hours putting this together from the meetings and attending the meetings and the presentations and meeting with OFCC and looking at the data and helping build these recommendations. They have done so with great thought and great care to putting things in the right place. And lastly, I just want to remind ourselves that, as I've said oftentimes, I'm going to give 3 timelines. One is the immediate, which is kind of where we get stuck sometimes, is what are we staring at today, and what is my kid or my classroom or my building, or what does the community see today? And then there's this idea that we're really talking about framing a 10-year plan, which has lots of these components in it, and what does that look like? And we're going to talk about it a little bit tonight. But more importantly, I want you to think 30 and 40 years out. Westerville South was built in 1960, right? This is 2018, and now we're talking about replacement or renovation. Any decisions we're making with our community today have that longevity to them when we're talking about facilities, new or renovations. And so keeping that in mind about what we're doing, I think is very, very important, because there's going to be scads of kids and parents and teachers walking through these buildings in the future. So it's important to really give this the time it needs to stew and get the right answers. And so to that point, we get to the money side of this, and how do we frame a 10-year plan? We're not prepared to put a full 10-year plan in front of you yet. We want to get an idea how to frame this. And so it's really become important now to talk about 2 cost factors. One is the capital, which is the actual buildings and facilities that we're talking about. And in all of the discussions we've had with the community, wherever I've presented, we talk about capital. This is a different part of our budget. This is buildings. This is fixed assets. This is not salaries and benefits. But on the other side of this, whenever you're talking about capital improvements and the possibility, as is in this case, of new programming or expanded programming, all-day kindergarten or expanded magnets, or new buildings, you have an operational cost to that, whether or not that's going to be purely transportation or whether it's going to be staffing that goes with that, as well as textbooks, all the things that come with it. So when you add operational costs, it means it's there forever, not going to go away, and we have to keep that in mind. So how do we put this whole thing together? So we're trying to complete a plan. We need to consider both of those costs and any potential savings that might happen. So I'm going to dive into a second of just the capital budget considerations. And as we've talked about a lot, and the board knows, and many of the community members have been paying attention know, there's really a couple options here. We've talked a lot about certificates of participation, which is essentially a loan payment where we're using permanent improvement revenue to pay that back over time. We've done similar to that in the past. We're in the process now of finishing off a TAN that the board did several years ago. What we know is that it cannot cover the entire scope of the recommended projects on the list today. We've said that all along, and it continues to be the case. There's a portion of this that we can do from that piece. Beyond that, you have to go to the second revenue source, which would be a bond issue or issues over that time frame of I'm going to use that 10-year time period, right? Depending on how you want to parcel out the project. So that's really, in a nutshell, our best scenarios for funding the actual building side of this thing. So what are the general fund considerations? And this is where lots of moving parts have to come into place. First of all, what we know and have said for several years now as we've looked at our financial forecast, our 5-year forecast, is that we've always talked about projecting that the next need for an operating levy, a new operating levy, was somewhere in that FY21 or FY22 time period, fall of 20 or fall of 21, regardless of what we do with facilities. When we look at revenue to expenditures and the differentiation in that, it's going to be about that time period, which will represent about a 9-year time period since the last new money issue. We had a renewal in there, and that maintained that revenue source. So we know that exists out there. We also know this from a general fund consideration operating side, that, as I said, a new elementary and new middle school requires additional revenue for general fund. And that's operational costs again. So you're looking at operational costs that aren't factored into our 5-year forecast today that would need to be accounted for and change that trajectory over time. And we can do all kinds of forecasting with that and some ideas of what those costs might be. So when you have a new elementary and new middle school, of course, you're moving students around within the district, and that means, of course, because some schools will be smaller than they were in the past, you're going to move some staff, but there's a percentage of that staff that's going to be new. And what is that, and what does that cost? And we can project those things. The other recommendation that impacts the general fund would be the expansion of all-day kindergarten. And we underline that as a may because really we already have in our forecast projections for additional staffing over time, right? We have money in there to hire new staff over that course. So some of those dollars could be used to staff additional all-day kindergarten to a certain point. There's a point in which in there we would have to ask for more money for more staff. Our estimates right now is to go to full-blown 100% all-day kindergarten would require 17 additional teachers. That would be well beyond, in a short time frame, what we need or what we can afford in our forecast today. So we can parcel that or add that. Of course, the facilities component of this has an impact on how much all-day kindergarten we can do because it requires additional classrooms, right? Those classrooms right now have, the half-day classrooms have a section in the morning, section in the afternoon. You can't have a 40-student or 45-student all-day kindergarten, so you need another classroom for the other half, right? So we know that whatever we do facilities either gives us more opportunity for all-day kindergarten or limits. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say it's a point worth emphasizing. We need to remind ourselves that all-day kindergarten is not a state requirement.
Correct.
So as biennial budgets, regardless of their volatility, are being determined, the student population that we have in all-day kindergarten does not come into the state's formulation on the return of taxpayer monies to this district.
Right.
So regardless of how we look at it, we have to always look at all-day kindergarten as being a cost add to the district. Whether the community is desiring of it or not, it just simply isn't in the mandated education requirements.
Well, and there's the secondary question of whether or not all-day kindergarten, if we grow it, remains a tuition-based program as it is today to help offset some of the additional costs, but it doesn't offset all of the additional costs. And so that's always the second part of this, which we're not addressing. So we'd have to sort that piece out too. So how do you put this whole thing together, right? 10 years. We know that there are revenue solutions for the facilities master plan. We know we have projected operational costs they're going to need discussion with the community as is. And we know that there'd be additional revenue costs for some of the recommendations in the plan. How does that all, what does that all look like? And that's what we're trying to put together. So how do you put that together? So I stair-stepped this and suggested the following. There are a couple of ways to think of this. So let's just think about the facilities master plan framework from a 10-year picture. The simplest thing to do, of course, is do nothing. Right? No cops, no bond, leave everything as is. Right? And I don't think that's the option we're looking at. At the next level up would be probably something like a COPS, which allows, as we've talked about, the board and the district to move forward quickly on some of the recommendations. Just the scope of that, we can talk about how much, we can work all that out. The next level of that would be to supplement or do a bond issue, which would be straight for facilities, and a COPS issue coupled with that, which would give you greater revenue to address more of the recommendations and more of the facilities master plan. At that level, of course, you haven't added operational dollars, so you're limited in terms of whether or not you can address things like new buildings or additional all-day kindergarten. So at the next highest level on this stair step, so to speak, would be the idea of you putting bond, levy, and a COPS issue, or you could eliminate the COPS issue, make the bond issue bigger. You can see the moving parts in there, but those are kind of the three things you got to look at, right? The balancing act is revenue for the facilities, revenue for the operations, what does that look like? And so as it relates to what could be put in place to support the recommendations, those are kind of the options that we've talked about. To see it in kind of a timeline, I put this little picture together. The question marks next to COPS and bond and COPS, bonds, and levy, sounds like a bad John Candy movie, COPS, bond, and levy, is meant to say, where do you want to put that in this 10-year framework? Not to say that you do that in 18, but let's assume we're trying to go fast, trying to keep the pace of things going. You could look at the fall of 18 for any one of those kinds of options. You already know, as I said, that our financial forecast, and Laura's been working with Ernie on our next set of projections as we think about the May forecast. We know, we've talked about, there's a high degree of probability that somewhere in 20 or 21 we're going to have to ask for operating money as it is. So that's a double on top of a levy issue for the facilities master plan, that far right. We also talked this evening about the possibility of OFCC money being available in 21 if that's something we want to consider. And the bottom is kind of what you could get done, assuming you used one of those funding options in the top, what can you get done in that kind of a time frame? So if you just did a COPS issue, our recommendation at this point would be to do the renovations to South and use some additional funds from a COPS to support district-wide school safety improvements. The magnitude of that really depends on what the board's and administration's appetite for a COPS issue might look like. But that would be one set of recommendations. You're not doing as much of the project work that's in the recommendation, but you're not on the ballot. You're not adding operating costs. And you can see if you go one over, if you throw a bond issue into there at some point, whether or not that's in 18 or some other point, you're now able to fund more of the recommended projects. What you're probably not able to fund is those that have associated operating costs with them. New buildings and expansion of all-day kindergarten at a certain level. And the third idea would be, of course, if you opted to look at doing all three of those, again, the COPS is optional. If you do a bond issue, you can always change the size of the bond issue. I know you guys get it. But that would allow you to consider doing all the recommended projects, including the new buildings. Within that one, of course, you can change the size of the operating ask and decide whether or not you can do an elementary or middle and where do you want to put that. So this isn't meant to say this is the sequence. This is meant to say this is kind of how you got to, you can, you almost need these in sticky notes that you can move up and down the chart. Where would you put those? But you can see where they align to projected operating levies that we know exist for current conditions. Years 1 through 5. Years 6 through 10, based on the forecasting we're doing today, starting to forecast out in 24 gets tricky, but what we're seeing is the strong possibility based on economic conditions today, if we were thinking outside of 2020, 2021, when might we be next needing operating dollars without doing any of the recommended projects, we're staring at 24 as it stands now. And in May, Laura will present that forecast and give you some of the assumptions that are built into that impact that number. We also know in '27 that we currently have a debt service payment of about $6 million that would roll off. That's some millage that'll roll off. That's a debt service right now. So what happens is, if you think of the plan in 10 years and break that in half by 5 years, whatever you choose, one way to think of it is whatever you choose at top to secure for funding determines the scope of the work we can start with. Whatever you choose to leave on the table kicks to the second half of that plan, the next 5 years, but now has to be coupled with, as you see number 2 down there, the next fleet of aging buildings that we've talked about, right? So what we don't do in the first 5 years kicks to the next 5 years and starts to overlap with the next set of buildings. So it's that old, how much of this do you kick down the road, right? And I think that's the trigger point. So I think the hot button parts are how much of the facilities do you want to address in that 10-year plan, and what do we want to do in terms of looking at operating costs for some of these components as well in the discussion with the community. So that's the way we've started to frame this. So I don't want to leave us thinking it's that muddled. We think there's some clear paths to continue on, kind of to Dr. Nestor Baker's thinking a little while ago. So here would be some next steps that would be for us to consider. First one is a technical one, which would be, we know in talking to our attorneys that there's a resolution the board could pass this spring. We would recommend consideration of that for April 23rd. And Lauren knows this about this one as well. You can pass a resolution so that we can start on projects today, capital improvement projects, and future revenue for that, like a COPS or bond issue, could be used to repay the district back for those costs. So worst case scenario, or one way to view this would be to say, listen, if it's going to cost money to start the design process of South, where's that money going to come from today? We can take that money from current expenditures. It could be from fund balance or from our carryover dollars. Use that money today to start that process, and then later on, if we do when we do a COPS or do a bond, we can pay ourselves back that money. So that's one way to look at it. And
Hey, John.
whether or not you do it or not doesn't matter. If you don't pass the resolution, you can't do it. So if you pass the resolution, you're hedging your bets that you can do it if you want to do it. Make sense?
Is there, just so I understand the process, though, if we choose to pursue a COPS, does that come back before the board again? Or is the authorization to spend against the potential of a COP considered to be approval?
I would assume you'd have to have a separate resolution later to pass the COPS.
Okay.
Right? So
that right?
you pass, am I getting it right, Laura?
Yep.
I don't mean to usurp her, because she knows this stuff better than I do, but she tends to be more quiet than I am, so. You want to fix me on anything on this yet? Okay, pipe up if you need to. Just throw something at me. I'm a treasurer in training is all I am. So if we were to consider moving forward with a COPS issue, as we see it, based on the feedback from the community based in discussions that we've had, South is the largest project in the fleet of the first set of recommendations. It is arguably the highest need at this point. So using COPS for the renovation project guarantees that project moves forward, if it's a renovation. At a replacement, I'm not sure that the finances work that well within the COPS, but that could be considered if the board wanted to. We also feel that within that model, we could begin addressing district-wide school safety improvements to facilities across the district. So to do that, we would suggest that we begin the design process for the renovation of Westerville South, and we begin, which we already have done, developing a scope of work for the district-wide school safety improvements that we would recommend to facilities. So how do you change the entryways at some buildings? What can we do with cameras? There are some other ideas we have out there that can enhance security. So the idea of a resolution so you can reimburse yourself for those expenses. We can go ahead and start work. We don't have to wait. We don't need all the money for construction in South today. We won't need that for several months till we're through the design phase. But we need money for the design phase. That would allow us to do that. Then we think of the remaining projects, we have still some things, I think, to sort through, as we've talked about here this evening, regarding some of the changes to the recommendations. What do we do with those? We would strongly recommend that we consider continuing dialogue with the community about those. We can get a little bit more specific now than we were in the past. One of the feedbacks we heard in the first exchange was, well, what's going to happen to the magnets if you close Emerson and Hanby? Where are those programs going? And if you recall, there wasn't any recommendation about those programs specifically in the first recommendations. In these revised recommendations, as they stand today, there would be suggestions about what those look like. Whether or not that teases out additional response is something we can see as well. So we would recommend opportunities for more discussion with the community on the remaining parts of that to see what the response is. The other thing we would recommend, hedging bets that if there is a decision to put a ballot issue on in November, that Laura can review with the board the timelines for taking action so that you don't lose the opportunity if that's where you choose to go. If you know absolutely no chance of going on the ballot in the fall, then we're not worried about it for the fall of 18. But if you want to keep hedging your bets and keep one toe in that water, then there are some steps we need to take here in the next couple of months that Laura can review with us about what resolutions you'd have to pass. Doesn't mean you are, it just means you're not losing the opportunity if you want to do that. So based on how we've dissected this, looked at it, timed it out against some of those other pieces, tried to put in the big picture, we felt it was important to put some things in front of the board and the community to say, let's keep the momentum going and start addressing some stuff, but there's some components to this that still need some fleshing out and going to need more time, was the kind of the end result. Long presentation, lots of parts. Happy to take any questions or thoughts at this point.
Do you guys have any questions or comments?
Oh, you know it. Okay, so I'm going back to but I want to know what we all want to do around the recommendations question. So maybe it's just me, but I would feel a lot more comfortable if we, whether it's by consensus or a vote or whatever, said that we basically accept the idea about renovating South instead of rebuilding South or whatever, instead of just going off and gathering design information. I'm not sure I have a clear sense of what the board wants to do around that particular recommendation.
Any other questions or comments?
No, although I just asked, I don't know the preparedness of the other board members, but do we just simply want to call a resolution from the floor?
We could do that, or we could say, you know, next meeting, we want to do that, or whatever, but I would like us to get moving on South sooner rather than later, but I would like to know in what direction the board wants to move, because there's a big difference, you know, in my thinking, as we talk about renovation and rebuild, and that also then obviously has a significant impact on those financing questions. So I'm feeling a bit at sea until I know what the consensus of the board is.
So I can tell you how I feel. Being facilities liaison and working closely with Jeff and knowing that to rebuild it, we're talking $20 million additional versus a renovate, and we have so many other needs in our district, I would support a renovate, to renovate South. And I'm comfortable moving forward and letting him start design. I feel like we need to go.
There's a 2-week lag between now and the next board meeting, I believe, right? April 23rd. So in between, if it's helpful, we certainly could bring back a presentation to the board that shows with a little bit more detail the differences. More importantly, what can be done with a renovation project and what kind of price tag that would bring and what enhancements that would bring. Is that kind of, Dr. Nestor Baker, what you're talking about?
I think probably, and you know, I have not polled each of you individually. I have a feeling that we each have a sense of where we want to go with South. And I think there's been an awful lot of discussion within the community, and you saw some of the comments on the thought exchange and so forth about what the board does want to do. You know, people are saying, you know, tear it down, start over again, no, renovate it, no. So there's a lot of that. I actually line up with Tracy on this. I think that South needs significant renovation. I would not be in favor, I am not in favor of tearing it down and rebuilding it, and I want to make clear to the community where we stand on what's going forward and what is being designed.
Jeff, could you come back up to the microphone? For a while now, I have leaned toward renovation for a number of reasons in my own head, which would only make sense to me, because that's the way that brain thinks. It only makes sense to me. Could you speak to, you haven't done design things yet, I get that. Could you speak to, again, why you think that you could make a renovated South as strong and vibrant and creative and innovative as you believe it should be? $20 million, a lot of money, and can address a lot of different needs, but I almost want to put that aside. Tell me why you feel that a renovated South is a strong choice.
Well, let me first clarify, it goes beyond renovation. I'm going to add the word expansion to that.
Yeah, great, thank you,
Okay.
yes.
So it's not just renovating, it's expanding.
Yeah, good.
And the square footage we have built into the model that Dr. Kellogg is using for these financing options is 37 million. So that's a lot of money to work with to create this cool vibe. So we're talking about a bump out on the cafe. As we know, as more additions have been built onto South, it necessarily hasn't increased the size of the cafe, which has been problematic that we've been hearing in a number of our buildings. That number also includes, you're pretty much gutting everything with the exception of the walls. But with that being said, because of the, when I say that, that's components of HVAC, electrical.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
And
for
two,
that
one of
clarification.
the,
Don't worry about that, yeah.
which includes, one of the issues that have been problematic for us is that underground crawl space.
Right.
Yeah.
And we would abandon the crawl space, so to my point of mechanical electrical, this would be all new mechanical electrical components, and then we would fill in the crawl space so that slab would be on grade at that point. And I think the shell of the building, with the way that South fingers out, you have a lot of natural light coming into a lot of those academic spaces that is desirable for us to work with, in contrast to working with something like at North, where you don't have that. So I think the frame of the building lends itself well to making these improvements for aesthetics and these inspiring environments for students.
And that's great, and that's as far as I wanted you to go, because I know that the design is not in place, and I wouldn't want you to say we are going to do X when we don't know that yet. I just wanted you to speak so that the community hears from you and Dr. Kellogg. We know it has to be. We know we want it to be innovative and creative and vibrant, not only safe, warm, and dry. And in addition to that, the community members that I have talked to, by and large, have said, from what you all have done at Walnut Springs, Point View, the shop, you have some credibility with us. I want to say that again for the emails that we may get. What we have done, we have tried to do well, and I think those are three really good examples. Now I do go back to Tracy, the $20 million. The $20 million difference can make a world of difference in some of our buildings and situations that are just on the bubble. Make a big difference. And the fact that the people from Central and North voted so in favorably of addressing South's issues, I would say, says something about the cohesiveness of this district, saying, we will compete with you on the field, et cetera. We will choose to beat the daylights out of you there, but we want you to have a great facility too. And I think all of that adds up, and I know Nancy, Dr. Nancy, you are wanting to get, you're wanting to get some of this on the record, and I actually think that's a good idea. I feel very good about the way you have framed what we would like to do, renovation with Westerville South. So I would go on the record of saying, we can wait a couple weeks and look at some things, but I'm kind of ready for that resolution. I'm hearing Tracy is, Dr. Nancy is. Dr. Richard, do you have a?
Well, I think if we are all in the place where we feel comfortable making a formal statement, I think I've boned up on my parliamentary procedures so that I can first call for the question to end the discussion.
Well, unless our president would like to.
I can still do this anyhow, but yes.
You can do.
I can go rogue.
You can do.
She might make you pay later.
Yeah.
That's true. She's got the hammer.
Yeah, well, I mean, at a minimum, I would like to call the question on the topic of Westerville South renovation, because that will put an end to the conversation. And then, if there's, how are you?
I am definitely leaning towards the renovation as well, but I was going to ask Jeff a question. As far as the rebuild goes, there were some complications with that as a possibility too. Could you just go over, I know you touched on it briefly, but could you go over a little bit more detail about that?
I think it would be a challenge. Whatever we lay out, it has to be approved by the city. And I'm just projecting that if we build, we would have to build in the back of the building, right? There's just no room on the site. And when we do that, and if we would replace and then tear down the existing south, what would they allow us to do with the property along the frontage of Otterbein? So would they allow us to put practice fields that close to Otterbein? I feel that, as I said in the presentation, I think the usable site would shrink.
We ask for a sign modification.
Oh, I have an update there.
Sorry. Sorry.
Sore subject, Rick, I'm just saying.
He called the question, sorry.
So we're
Give
good?
you all you needed?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, since I've dug into it, I believe that, I believe that the thing I have to ask for first is a motion to suspend the rules.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then I think the next thing that I need to ask is if I maybe yielded the floor, so the president has to tell me whether or not I can.
You can.
Okay. And I'd like to forward a motion for resolution for consideration of renovation of Westerville South High School. Pardon me, not consideration, for an agreement by the board to renovate Westerville South High School.
Is there a
Proceed
second?
with design for renovation.
There we go. Let me
Proceed with
restate it.
design for renovation, design options for renovation of Westerville South High School.
There we go. Well, let's get the resolution
We're
right on
getting
the
the
first
resolution
one.
right. We're crafting the resolution while we're talking.
Yes.
Yeah. So scratch all that.
Scratch all that.
To proceed with development of design options for Westerville South High School?
Correct.
In the city of Westerville, in the state of Ohio.
Okay with that? We have a motion.
No, I'm voting against
Do we have a second?
Second.
Who motioned?
Richard.
Richard.
I motioned.
All right, then Nancy. All right.
We make this look easy, don't we? I'm just saying.
mind call vote?
Yes, please call the roll.
There we go. Okay. Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes. Yes, sorry.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes.
Oh, thank heaven.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Sure.
So with the renovation for South, that'll take a number of years. And so I'm just wondering if you could, as part of your design efforts, try and figure out how much money we need when? Because if we go for a COPS, maybe we could structure it so we're not getting it all up front if we don't need it all up front.
I know that answer.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it possible?
So looking at just getting us up to the construction documents. So we're estimating about 7 months. And I have a total design cost, but just looking at those first 7 months, it's about $143,000 a month. Per month, for 7 months. Did I mumble that?
He mumbled.
Is that just part of the design phase, or?
That'll get us up to where we have to we need a schematic design. So once we can hone in, and this is working with the community and the staff, coming up with a schematic design, and then there's the next phase, which is design development, where we start to bring in those consulting engineers, the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, start working on the components of the design. The next phase is actually putting those construction documents together for bidding and submitting that to the city. And as you know with the sign, there's an approval process there. So what we have allotted is we have 3 months for schematic design, 4 months for design development, and 4 months for construction document development and permitting. And then we have a month and a half for bidding the project, and we're ready to go.
Okay, that sounds good.
And I'll
Thank
go
you.
on the record and say we won't disappoint. All right.
So you took a first step this evening, and thank you on behalf of our staff for having that confidence, I think, into the community. We will work hard to meet those expectations, to involve people, to deliver a product. We still have other components of this we need to keep fleshing out. We will go back now and look at what we have. We will continue with the scope of work, because there's not the same kind of cost needs to developing a scope of work on school safety and how that might fit in this. So we'll continue developing that part. And I think next phase for us then will be perhaps coming back to you at the next April meeting with a game plan for how do we want to process the rest of this planning part, right? Because we just did a sliver. Big chunk, but there's a lot of pieces underneath that get a little bit more complicated. So I think that might be the next phase for us as well. So thank you for your time this evening on the presentation, and thank you for the confidence to move forward. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6.01. There is nobody signed up for this public comment period. So we will continue to move on to item 7.01 and then 7.02, financial reports. 7.01, can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Hendricks.
Good evening, President, member of the board. So today we are presenting February financials, and I'll just give you a few highlights. Year-to-date receipts for the general fund, $143,725,000. Year-to-date expenditures, $107,432,000. An unencumbered general fund balance of $124,178,000. All funds, year-to-date receipts, $184,683,000. Year-to-date expenditures for all funds, $146,648,000. Unencumbered fund balance of $145,372. That is our February financials.
Any questions?
Roll.
Okay, please call the roll.
Okay. Dr. Nestor Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes.
Mr. Byrd.
Yes.
Ms. Davidson. Ms. Cutter.
Yes. Okay, moving on to 7.02, can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Okay,
Ms.
thank you.
Hendricks?
No, sorry, okay. So another amounts and rates, similar to what we had a month ago, although those were for collection in 18 for 19, so an estimate, then they also require us to come back and do a final. So these are for what is being collected for tax year 2017, being collected now in 2018. So these are just the rates that they are using to collect our taxes for this current calendar year. So that's just a standard procedure.
Any questions? Can you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Ms. Davidson, Ms. Cotter.
Yes. Okay, moving on in the agenda to item 8. Ms. Lofton, can I have a motion and a second to consider items 8.01 through 8.13?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, Ms. Lofton.
Good evening, President Cotter, members of the board. Tonight's consent agenda contains 13 sections involving 81 persons. Section 8.01 is the resignation of 5 classified employees and 4 substitutes. And as I always do, I would like to take just a second to recognize Lori Harris, who resigned from our office a few weeks ago to accept a position in the private sector. She's with the district for just about 9 years, and we wish her all the best, and we'll miss her greatly. 8.02 is the resignation of 1 teacher and 1 coach. 8.03 is a leave of absence for 2 classified employees and 1 amended item. 8.04 is a leave of absence for 4 teachers. 8.05 is the termination of 1 classified employee. 8.06 is the retirement of 1 classified employee. 8.07 is the retirement of 2 administrators and 2 teachers. 8.08 is a change of assignment for 5 classified employees and 1 amended item. 8.09 is a contractual status change for 7 classified employees and 1 amended item. 8.10 is a one-time payment for a classified employee. 8.11 is a one-time payment for 9 teachers and 2 amended items. 8.12 is the employment of 4 classified employees and 3 substitutes. And 8.13 is a variety of employment actions for licensed staff, including what I believe are the last of our summer school employment items, a couple of coaches, and a supervisor. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo,
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Mr. Byrd.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Lori.
We probably I should probably note that there are 2 retirements in there. Gail Walters from special education and Crystal Harris, assistant principal at South. And we wish them well in retirement and thank them for their many years of service to our students and our families. So just thought I'd take a moment to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, moving on to item 9.01, there is no old business. And then agenda item 10.01 is recommended action on new business, revised policy 4121, criminal history record check. I see that we have Ms. Lofton back. Can I have a motion? Oh, no, we don't need it. Never mind. Okay.
Good evening, President Cotter, again, members of the board. I'm here tonight to present a recommendation for revision to policy 4121, criminal history records check. The policy is being revised or recommended to be revised to include language that complies with recent changes in the Department of Transportation regulations and in Ohio Administrative Code. The revision will now spell out some specific prohibition on the texting and the use of handheld electronic devices while operating a commercial motor vehicle, and an updated list of offenses for bus and van drivers. And again, this is just adding that reference to the code in this policy. The accompanying administrative guidelines will also be revised.
Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to action item 11.01, resolution to terminate employment during probationary period. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes.
Mr. Berg.
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes.
Ms. Cotter.
Yes. Okay, moving on to our second public comment period, agenda item 12.01. Just a reminder, you will have 5 minutes to address the board in the public comment period. Please remember to, please remember there will be a timer shown on the screens, and Mr. Hershiser will call time when the 5 minutes has elapsed. Please address your comments to the board and not to the audience. Our first speaker this evening is McKenna Hanush.
Hello. I am McKenna Hanush. I am an 8th grader at Jerome Middle School, and I'm on an IEP for dyslexia. I stand in front of you, sure that what I'm saying will not make a difference, but I'm going to say what I have to say and hoping that someone here will try to understand. Yes, I am a kid, and I'm sure that you don't believe what I'm speaking for myself. These are my feelings and my words, not my parents. This is coming from my heart and what I deal with every day. This is very, very real to me. When I walk into school, I feel like there are 100 fingers pointing at me. Who am I worried? Who am I worried about? The teachers who don't respect me and don't help me when I need it. And think of me less than because I have dyslexia. When the teachers call me out in class and ask me if I need something modified or something that's listed in my IEP, my classmates think of me as less than. When I had teachers who respect me and helped me, I was a straight A student and was inducted into National Junior Honor Society. This year I do not have teachers who respect me or give me the help that I need to be successful. After many, many long meetings, they still don't listen. They are still embarrassing me in front of my class. And the school talks to us about being respectful and not being bullies and being safe. But the teachers don't do as they say. They are not respectful to me, and their words and actions make me feel less than. I want change. I want teachers that know how to teach reading. I want teachers that not only follow my IEP, I want teachers to think about how their words and actions make me feel. I want the school to stop making excuses and make it work for me and all the other students who struggle. I am not just speaking for me, I'm speaking for all students who struggle but do not have their support to speak up. I want change for all of them as well. We are the future and we are not less than. I want to believe that after you hear this, a change will happen. But I've been fighting for this for so long that I don't trust that anything will happen. Please prove me wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, McKenna. The next speaker is a group of speakers. Is it Sarah Miles, along with Summer Pitzer and Mariah Culver? Come up, please.
Good evening. My name is Sarah. This is Summer. This is Mariah. And we're here to speak on behalf of Silas Williams. He was a basketball coach at Westerville South that was just retained as a coach. And I just want to kind of speak on his behalf of my feelings as well as some of the other people here. I mean, I don't really know where to start other than saying this man is absolutely amazing with myself and these girls. He has done a wonderful job in the past 10 seasons as a coach. I've known him for about 15 years, and I mean, he's been more of like a father figure to me. He's helped me get through college. He's helped me get to where I am today. And these girls here have nothing but respect for him, and we feel as a group that he's done all he can for these girls as far as taking them to the district champs, which is the first time in history. He's also done an amazing job as helping them grow as individuals, as beautiful young ladies. And, you know, I've never had anything negative come from this man. He does everything he can for all of us. And I think that individually we have all grown from having him a part of our lives. He has helped many people get scholarships. He's in the process of helping these girls go D1. And I think having, you know, another coach come in and take over is going to diminish what he's done to this program. I think it's going to kind of stop what he's done. I know there are about 5, if not more, girls who have almost signed to D1 schools, and their education has went from 0 to 10 with him being around. His dedication, his hard work, his knowledge about the game, about education is just phenomenal. And, you know, I feel that bringing somebody else into the program is going to kind of take that away from these girls. That's all they know. That's who they looked up to, who they go to about everything. So I don't feel that bringing somebody in to this program is going to help as much as he has helped. I know that I can speak on behalf of these two ladies right here. His hard work is just, it's incredible. The amount of time and dedication he spends often on the court to make sure that they have what they need, have the materials they need. They never go without. He's constantly pushing them to be better, to be the best that they can. He has a relationship with these college coaches as well, to kind of get them to where they need to be. And I know when you bring somebody else into a program that's not familiar with it, it kind of brings that down a little bit, and it's going to be hard to build that back up. And, you know, I kind of feel for where everyone else is coming from. I'm a little bit older than them. I graduated in 2010, but I've known him almost 10 plus years, and, you know, he coached me in AAU, he's coached me in high school, and I'm kind of, you know, discouraged about what's taken place in the past couple weeks, and I know a lot of these players are as well. So we just wanted to come up here and have our voice be heard on his behalf, along with some of the other people in the audience, and just kind of let you guys know a little bit of the inside of how he runs things and how he does things. And, you know, we just hope that you guys understand where we're coming from, and hopefully you guys can listen to what we have to say, and hopefully nothing but positive outcome comes from this. So.
And it's not just about basketball with Silas. I mean, when we have practice from 5 to 7, he makes us do study tables. And of course we hate it, but it improves everyone's grades. I mean, like, we literally have 5 players on the team that has 4.0s and above. I mean, so many people have won the Scholar Athlete Award with him. He, like, takes time to, like, talk to people individually, to build relationships with them, see how they're doing mentally, not just for basketball, but mentally in life, you know, any type of situation you're going through, he's always there for everyone. And I would just really hope that you guys would investigate the situation and reconsider what has taken place. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Okay, moving on in the agenda to item 13.01, board comments. Are there any board comments this evening?
I'd just say a couple things. We are going to try to listen to you. And to you ladies for the basketball team as well. And if you hear nothing else from me, and I don't speak for the board, but I know they're on board with this. We really are trying to be a board of education that listens and makes the best decisions we know how. And nobody should be going into school and not feeling supported by staff. And I don't know all the details, but I would say I commend your courage, all of you, to stand up there and to speak what you believe is the truth from your heart. So that's where I will leave it right now, and just thank you for, one, sitting through this whole meeting. You got an award for that. And two, for speaking, all of you, eloquently and caringly about what matters to you. That does matter to us. It does matter to us. I had written a few things I wanted to share. I'm not going to go into all of it. Westerville Partners for Education, you all are stars in our books with Starry Night, and with I went to an event at Point View, and I sat next to two students. One had done a project on the Rwanda genocide, and one had done a project on racism from the Civil War to the Depression in media. These were middle school students, and they were excited about it. Sat next to a group of classmates that were working in chemistry on blended learning, using Schoology, using Schoology, and they were talking about chemistry, and the kids were excited about it. Sat in a class where we put on some virtual reality goggles, and the teacher said, so when we study, Chinese civilization, we'll kind of take them there first, and they can see and walk around. And the kids were excited about it. So I don't know what you think about what we're doing technologically in this district, but I was really proud of what I saw that night. And I was more proud of the teenagers that were there that said, here, let me show you what I'm doing in my class. I would never have done that as a kid. Don't tell my children, but I would never have done that. To those of you that got awards, really, we just love honoring these folks that are just doing great work. And I'll just conclude with a huge shout out to the community committee that worked for a year. Were they together on this building thing and meeting for months and over time and got paid nothing? And now we get to look at the fruits of their labor and say, this can be really good. So we do care about every student, and I would say every staff person. And thank you for your bravery.
Any other comments?
It's very difficult to follow Mr. Villardo's words when he said what I would imagine we all feel in so many ways. There is so much good in this community, so much good in the people who live here, who work here, who are part of the school system, who are part of the school district. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect, and it doesn't mean that we won't care about and won't pay attention to the things that hurt you or that worry you. We will, and we do, just as we pay attention to the good that we see. Part of the good that we saw tonight involves those students who stood up tonight to talk. It does take bravery to stand up We've heard an awful lot of voices shake from adults who stand to talk to us. We're not really very scary, but something about standing at that podium is a fright inducer. And to have the ability to stand at that microphone and say what is in your heart speaks so much of the good in you. And we do listen, and we do investigate, and we do look, and we do pay attention, and we do what we can to make changes when changes can be made, and we do what we can to celebrate what goes on in this district. Tonight was long, and I know I am a big part of the reason it was long, but that's because what we were talking about tonight is a really big deal. I thank the Facilities Committee members for all the work they did to tee it up, all of the information they delved into that led to their recommendations. I thank the community members that have taken part thus far in providing input to us through thought exchange. I thank our administrators who have been working like crazy to come up with all of the planning and the packaging and the information and the analysis that we need to make these decisions. And so yes, it does take time, but that's because it matters for decades. So if it takes time to make decisions and come to directional points that will make decades better for all of us, then time we will take. So thank you for sitting through it, and please be sure to give us input, to give us information, to share your thoughts with us, because that is so much a part of the decisions that we make.
I'm not going to echo everything the two of them have said. They said it beautifully. Thank you again to our speakers. We truly do want to hear from you and appreciate. Secondly, I want to let you guys know that Scott Dorn and I went to the Zoning Board Commission. Is that what it was, Scott? And the City Council is going to do the first reading on signs for North and South this month. So that's kind of exciting. It's only been how many years? It's okay. It's coming, though.
Longer than I've been here.
Yeah. So, no, that's it.
I'm going to leave the sign subject alone. We all know how I feel about it. I just remember there was a promise made to me in prior, I'm not going to leave it alone.
Yeah.
A promise made to me in prior, yeah. There was a promise made to me, there was a promise made to me, if we get the sign done, that I was going to be digitized and put on that sign, you know, probably in a kilt and dancing. There's a whole backstory to that, but.
I never made that promise.
No, I know you didn't.
I never.
No, I want to take a second here because I know that we've thanked particularly the students that have come forward. I think it's also worthwhile to take a moment and thank the community members that have shared information with us. It's important to make sure that we highlight how critical it is that students, community members come to this podium. Because I think the boards of education are one of the least understood elected bodies in the community, just simply because, and I know that we have echoed this statement multiple times in the time that I've been here. A school board has no authority amongst its individuals. We only have authority and power when we are called into session. So why that's so important when it comes to public comment, and why I'm so proud of students that will come forward, is that it gives us a burden of obligation when a topic is introduced, even in public comments, in a session. Right? We are obligated now to take steps in action, where, if you can imagine how difficult it would be if we get an individual inquiry, or we get stopped walking on the sidewalk and we have a conversation. You can imagine how challenging it is for us to all coordinate and be able to share all that information together when we fall under rules like the Sunshine Rule in the state of Ohio, which says that if at any time 3 of us gather and there is any mention of business related to the school board or to the school district, we're violating law. So it's a challenging dynamic that we have to balance, but it makes it all that much more important for the public to be here and to step up and to speak. And I understand that it takes the courage to do that, but it's so fundamentally important to how we are able to operate as elected representatives in this community. So thank you so much. Appreciate what you do. Like I said, we're obligated at this point. And I was really, really just happy to see that facilities plan. It's been a long time coming and a lot of work. And I was really happy that we could move forward on design for Westerville South, because it made us look like an overnight sensation a year and a half in the making. So, and it just feels good to be getting some forward traction.
I would like to thank the students for speaking tonight, too. I do think it takes a lot of bravery, so I appreciate your comments. Also, I just wanted to remind people, or let you know if you don't know already, that there is an event coming up that the Westerville Education Foundation is sponsoring called Artful Affair on May 5th. So if you're looking for something to do that evening, please consider going to the Artful Affair. It is a great organization. They sponsor a lot of grants for our teachers here in Westerville School District. So those are my only comments. Okay, our next board meeting will be on April 16th at 4:30 p.m., and that will be an executive session. Then the next meeting after that is a regular session on Monday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. Also, the board will meet in executive session on Wednesday, April 25th, and Thursday, April 26th at 6 p.m. at the Early Learning Center, again, an executive session. Of course, these executive sessions are to try and recruit our new treasurer, in case anyone's wondering why there's so many meetings coming up. And at this time, I would like to entertain a motion and a second for executive session this evening to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations with employees regarding their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
So moved.
Second.
Can you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. So we won't actually adjourn until after executive session, but we won't be doing any business after the executive session either. So you're free to go. Thank you for coming tonight.